This video is a supplemental lecture that is meant to further expand upon some material that is covered in the lecture entitled The Function Argument, and you can find a link to that video in the description section below. In the opening paragraphs of Chapter 7, Book 1 of the Nicomachean Ethics, Aristotle tells us that eudaimonia, the highest human good, is something that is both complete without qualification and self-sufficient. And in fact, it is in large part because eudaimonia has these qualities that it deserves its status as the highest human good. But what do these concepts mean? And why must the chief good of human life have these properties? After rejecting some of the common ideas about what constitutes human happiness, those opinions which would hold that human happiness is something like wealth or pleasure or honor, in Chapter 7, Aristotle finally tells us what eudaimonia consists in. And he begins by reminding us of what exactly it is that we are looking for. What we are searching for is the end not just of some particular action or choice, but of all actions and all choices. We are searching for, in Aristotle's words, the good among things done. In the passage I just read, Aristotle seems to leave open the possibility that human happiness might consist of more than one thing. He states that if there are several ends, these will be the goods. However, as we proceed through Chapter 7, I think it will become clear that Aristotle believes there is just one such good, one chief good at which all human activity aims. And Aquinas' commentary on Aristotle's Ethics can help provide some insight into why this might be. Aquinas tells us that there must be indeed one ultimate end for man precisely as man, because of the unity of human nature. Just as there is one end for a physician as physician because of the unity of the art of medicine. Here Aquinas appeals to the unity of human nature, but what does this mean? Consider his analogy between the life of a human being and the art of medicine. There are many tasks involved in the art of medicine: an understanding of the human body, maybe knowledge of how to perform surgery, and when to prescribe certain kinds of medications. However, all these different activities are oriented toward the same goal, the goal of health. The physician herself will also play many roles in her life. She may be a parent, a friend, and a school council member. But insofar as she acts as a physician, her actions are oriented toward curing illness and restoring health. In this way, all the various things that a physician does as a physician have a certain kind of integrity. They all cohere in the pursuit of some final end. Aquinas believes that we should see human life the same way. If we are living a human life properly, then we cannot just pursue any goal we like, just as a doctor cannot just pursue any goal she likes and still be a good doctor. For example, if a doctor in her role as a doctor was devoting her time to the pursuit of artistic beauty, then she may be pursuing a worthwhile end, but she would not be pursuing the worthwhile end that defines what it means to be a doctor. Likewise, Aquinas believes that there must be some end or purpose which defines what it means to be human, and which gives unity and coherence to human life. Some single thing which provides an answer to the question of what a human life is supposed to be about. As we have seen, this thing is eudaimonia or happiness, the very concept which Aristotle now seeks to explain in more detail. However, before Aristotle provides his definition of happiness, he first introduces two more criteria that something must meet in order to qualify as eudaimonia. Specifically, he argues that eudaimonia is both complete and self-sufficient. Let's begin by considering what it means to say that eudaimonia is complete. Not all ends, not everything that we pursue is something complete. However, the chief good manifestly is something complete. Furthermore, if there is only one end that is complete, then that is what we are searching for when attempting to define the nature of eudaimonia. Here again, we see Aristotle suggest that eudaimonia is some single good or single type of good. Specifically, Aristotle suggests that whatever eudaimonia is, we should expect it to be the sole good that can claim to be complete. But what does it mean for an end to be complete? Speaking generally, the completeness of an end is determined by the extent to which it is worth pursuing for its own sake. If a thing is worth pursuing just for itself and not for some further consequence, then we say that that thing is complete. If the reason we pursue it is in order to gain something else that we desire, then that end is incomplete. However, this is not quite precise enough, because when talking about the completeness of an end, it is not simply a matter of it being either complete or incomplete. Rather, completeness comes in degrees. Specifically, Aristotle identifies 3 different degrees of completeness. To see this, the first question we need to ask about an end is the one mentioned above. Is the thing pursued for its own sake, or merely pursued on account of its usefulness, for the sake of something else? If something is only pursued for the sake of something else, then we say that it is an incomplete end. Aristotle gives the examples of wealth or flutes, or in general, anything that we use as a tool or implement. We saw this point previously in Aristotle's discussion of money. Money is a good thing, but only because it lets you buy other things. For this reason, money would be an example of an end that is the least complete. Now, what about those things worth pursuing for their own sake? The things that we desire for their own inherent value and not merely because we can get something else from them. Among things of this sort, there is a further distinction we need to make. Is the thing in question only worth pursuing for its own sake? Or, in addition to being pursued for its own sake, is it also desired for its utility, because it gets us something else? Consider some examples of goods that are in the latter category. Aristotle gives the examples of honor, pleasure, intellect, and virtue. We should notice that these are the goods pursued through the lives of pleasure, politics, and contemplation. These goods are sought both for their own sake as well as for the sake of something else. Consider moral virtue, and let's focus on a specific virtue, the virtue of honesty, for instance. As we will see in Book 2, Aristotle takes a virtue, roughly speaking, to be a settled disposition to act in a certain way that is formed and developed through habit. The honest person is not someone who merely tells the truth once, but has a habit of telling the truth, even in difficult circumstances, that was developed through repeatedly performing honest actions. Now, suppose you were successful in developing the virtue of honesty. That in itself would be a great achievement, and it would make sense to say that you had arrived at the end goal of a particular chain of actions and decisions. It would make sense to say that you were satisfied in what you accomplished, and that becoming an honest person was an activity worthwhile for its own sake. As Aristotle tells us here, virtue, just like honor, pleasure, and intellect, is something that we would still choose for itself, even if it had no other good effects. However, in addition to the inherent choiceworthiness of virtue, we also choose virtue for another reason. Specifically, we choose it because it contributes to our happiness. So while honor, pleasure, intellect, and virtue really are worth pursuing for their own sake, we are also, on top of that, motivated to pursue them for the further end of happiness. This means that such ends are complete in one sense, but incomplete in another. They are complete in virtue of their intrinsic value. but incomplete insofar as these things are not the final end goal of all of our actions and activities. Honor is valuable, pleasure is valuable, intellect is valuable, and virtue is valuable. But ultimately, our actions do not rest in any of these goods. Our actions ultimately rest in the achievement of happiness. This leads us to a consideration of the highest degree of completeness, those things that are chosen only because they're good in themselves and for no other reason. Here, Aristotle identifies happiness as the only example. We desire happiness because it is the complete fulfillment of what it means to lead a flourishing human life. For that reason, it is obviously something worth pursuing for its own sake. Furthermore, there is no other reason for which we pursue this good. There's nothing else we hope to get from happiness. It is the culminating achievement of a good human life that encompasses all human activity. So while ends like pleasure, honor, intellect, and virtue can be said to be complete since they are sought for their own sake, only happiness can be said to be complete without qualification. Happiness is the end that is complete to the highest possible degree. This gives us Aristotle's hierarchy of three different degrees of completeness. Some goods, like money and other tools or implements, are wholly incomplete. This is because they are pursued and desired merely for the sake of something else. Other goods, like honor, pleasure, intellect, and virtue, are rightly said to be complete because they are pursued for their own sake, but not without qualification, because more fundamentally, they are pursued for the sake of happiness. As such, we can term such goods complete with qualification. Then finally, there's the single good that is complete without any qualification, which has the highest degree of completeness and is not pursued for any other reason, and of course, that good is happiness. However, we might wonder here why it is that Aristotle believes the highest good is that which is only pursued for itself and not for any other reason. After all, it is great if something is sought for its own sake, but wouldn't it be even better if in addition to that it was also useful for another purpose? Wouldn't that only add to the goodness of the thing in question? Does this mean that honor, intellect, pleasure, and virtue should be seen as better goods than happiness? Notably, Aristotle's teacher Plato seemed to take the opposite view from Aristotle. In the Republic, Plato suggests that the finest goods are those which are valued both for themselves and for what comes from them. So, why did Aristotle hold the opposite view? Why, in his opinion, does the usefulness of something detract from its completeness instead of adding to it? I think we can discover the reason by reflecting on why completeness matters. The reason for seeking a complete end is that if we were to achieve that end, then we know there is nothing else we need to do. Again, we would have achieved the complete fulfillment of what a human life is all about. However, if there is something else for which an end is used for, some further good we seek through it, then that end cannot be the complete fulfillment of a human life. After all, there is still something else left for us to attain. So the reason happiness is not sought for the sake of any other good is not because of some defect or weakness in happiness. Rather, it is because of the strength and again, completeness of happiness. Insofar as happiness represents the complete fulfillment of human life, there is nothing else we should need, nor anything else we should want to gain from it. Recall that in addition to claiming that happiness is complete, Aristotle also states that happiness is self-sufficient. In fact, Aristotle tells us that these two concepts are linked. The complete good is thought to be self-sufficient, such that if we know that happiness is complete without qualification, then we also know that happiness is self sufficient. But what does it mean for an end to be self sufficient? Aristotle explains this point in the following way. We take what is self sufficient to be that which on its own makes life worthy of choice and lacking in nothing. Self sufficiency deals with whether the good in question makes our lives desirable, or, to put it another way, makes our lives a life we would choose to live. A good that is entirely self sufficient would be enough to make one's life desirable to the highest degree without the addition of any other kind of good. To see this, consider the example of honor. Aristotle would agree that honor often is a good thing in the right circumstances, but honor cannot be self sufficient. One could win many awards and recognitions, but still lead a rather empty life. Perhaps the person we are imagining lives a solitary life with no real friends, family, or human connection, spending all of her time in pursuit of the next award or achievement. And such a life does seem significantly lacking. Or perhaps this person has achieved great success in her public occupation, for which she has received many awards and honors, but in her private life she lacks virtue. She is mean, dishonest, and untrustworthy. Such a life, despite its real and various successes, would not be a complete and flourishing human life because it lacks virtue. This is not to say that honor is bad, but just to say that it is not the self sufficient end that we are looking for. Honor itself cannot produce a flourishing human life. However, if there is some self sufficient good, then possession of that good would make one's life worthy of choice and lacking in nothing without the need for anything else. Of course, as we would expect, Aristotle tells us that happiness is that self sufficient good. It is not just one thing among others, like honor or wealth or pleasure, rather, it is the ultimate good of a human life. And once we have achieved happiness, we need not search after any other good. It is important to recognize the full implications of what it means to say that happiness is self sufficient and not just one good among others. Specifically, it implies that unlike many other goods, happiness is not something that we seek to maximize. To see this, consider the following. Think about goods like wealth, pleasure, honor, and virtue. Would it make sense to want more of these? Would it make sense to want to maximize our possession of these things? There's always going to be, of course, a limit at which almost anything could be harmful. But generally speaking, it seems it would make sense to maximize these goods. Suppose you live a life where you enjoy many different kinds of pleasures. Couldn't you imagine having a little more pleasure in your life and then more pleasure and so on? Couldn't we say the same about wealth and honors? Even if we are well supplied of these things, isn't it possible to imagine ourselves enjoying just a little bit more money or just a little bit more recognition? No matter how good your moral character is, couldn't you be just a little more honest, courageous, and trustworthy? It generally makes sense to want more of these things and to seek to maximize them. All things being equal, more wealth, pleasure, honor, and virtue is better than less. All of these things are just one thing among others, and as a consequence, they increase in goodness even when the least good is added to them. Yet, importantly, the same is not true of happiness. Because happiness is entirely sufficient, not only does it not make sense to want more of it, but really it is impossible to have any more of it once it has been attained. To have more of something, your current supply of it must be lacking to some extent. But the whole point of saying that happiness is self sufficient is to say that it is not lacking in any respect. Therefore, once achieved, there is nothing more of it to be gained. It is entirely self sufficient. This means that our pursuit of happiness is not a pursuit of maximization. It is the pursuit of being able to rest satisfied knowing that we achieve the ultimate good of a human life well lived. From this discussion, we can now add two additional points to Aristotle's list of criteria that something must meet to qualify as eudaimonia. In addition to being the final end of all human activity, the most valuable end, that which distinguishes the human species, and something that to a large extent is within our control to achieve, eudaimonia must also be something that is both complete without qualification and self-sufficient. With these points in place, we will now be able to evaluate whether the definition of eudaimonia that Aristotle provides in chapter 7 really does meet these criteria. What kind of good could there be that is both complete without qualification and self-sufficient?